So we're here for the part 2 interview of myself, Billy King, and the interviewer and the person who is the producer for this interview is Richard Greene, a longtime friend, a gallery owner, and a pretty good cameraman with a flip video. So Richard will be doing the camera work today and asking me a few questions as we do part 2 of my interview. Richard, here's the camera. Ask away.
Okay, Billy. Billy, this is a magnificently big show, I might admit, and a very large space. I believe it's a 40-year show of your works.
Yeah, it starts in 1968, actually, with this piece here. This is one called Mom, and it's a mixed media on canvas. I have my first signature as Billy in that corner. I was massively high on THC at the time that I did this. And, you know, hippies were nostalgic for the idea of mom. And we were into the nostalgia as a concept, which was somewhat new at the time. No oxymoron intended there. And I, from that time on, went on with the Billy and Billy King as my name. I wanted to be a kid. I wanted to go out there and find out about ideas for people. I wanted to be the person who reported back. And so Billy seemed like the appropriate way to do that. Of course, the last name King, that interesting conflict. And that's so that's my 1968 piece. And then I go all the way up to 2009. I've got some pieces from Mexico. I've got some pieces from that I actually painted right here. This is the most recent work. And these are part of my Other People series, the grids. These are oils on canvas that I actually painted in this space. And that was painted in June and July and into August. But come on this way and kind of get a look at the whole size of this space, and I'll take you back to some of my first works, the works that had me in museums and had me in the Smithsonian. And those are my early works on paper and canvas. I hope you can hear me, and come along. So
these are your oldest pieces, your early works?
These are the early works, and in many cases I've purchased these back. This is the Juan Peron series, which is a dry chalk pastel on photographic backdrop paper. I have 3 of those currently. There's the peasant view, there's the casket scene, and off to my left here is the mob scene. Peron was a dictator of Argentina. I had just come back from South America when he died, and I wanted to show the Americans what it was like to have a different way of picking your leaders. And in South America, you know, a person could be a sports hero, cultural hero. Their page would be taken out of the paper, it'd end up on the wall, some candles, a crucifix. Before long, they became an icon, and everyone started to love them. And that was Peron's case. He was often photographed with his lovely wife, Evita. He was deposed as the dictator of Argentina, sent in exile to Spain, and then brought back to Argentina after the Dirty War. When he died, the whole country kind of came apart. In the United States, we had a very different system. You know, at that time in the 70s, we were killing anybody who wasn't part of the system. The Kennedys, Martin Luther King, George Wallace, Malcolm X. They were put down because they weren't part of the Republican Democratic two-party system. And I wanted to make that point. Then in '75, I worked in San Francisco in my massive studio there at North Beach. This is one of my early self-taught exercises, copying a detail from a Rembrandt. And I call this the anatomy lesson, the painting lesson, because I learned a lot from Rembrandt about how to keep the eye moving, that the point of painting was to keep the eye moving, constantly looking for ways to make the eye go off the page and then re-enter the page, keep the eye active. I mean, that's what a painting does best. A photograph explains itself instantaneously, and a painting continues to unfold over time. Jumping ahead to the 90s, this is the Millennium Metaphor, Romance Exiled, and homage to St. Calvin. I wanted to use the homoerotic male as the height of the masculine civilization, yet still flawed. And I worked in the St. Sebastian story, Shot Full of Arrows. And there are a multiple number of pieces, but again, these are works on paper and oil paint. And I stopped working on paper in the early 90s. Except when I was in Mexico, I began once again to work on paper a little bit. Here's a Cristo I did in Mexico. That's an oil on paper, because I really didn't have access to canvas this size. And this was done in 1994. But really, this is the end of the work on paper. Less than perfect.
Seek ye not perfection, but completion. On.
Also in that series of the Millennium Metaphor was masculinity chained, the whole idea of the male not knowing what they're supposed to do in this end of the era. And here again a second oil, this one on linen, of homage to St. Calvin, the St. Sebastian theme, and an additional Romance Exiled oil on paper with the male here being loaded with arrows. Then to my right is the much talked about but ultimately very damaged death of Juan Peron mob scene. Hope you can get that without the highlights. Come on in over here, there's less reflection, but this has got some water and sun damage. This is one of my earliest attempts at working this large. This has been seen very extensively, and a lot of color has been lost through this sun damage and water damage, but it has gained in its acceptability because it looks like a street scene that came from the street scene. So even though it's less than perfect, it's gained in its impact. Then in the mid-'80s, I was working on The Birth of Eve. That's a series that had to do with the origin of patriarchy and the masculine, feminine, and all these sorts of things. And the imagery that I developed was the female coming out of the male, the yin-yang moon. In some cases, there would be the serpent or temptation. And this is a theme that is revisited in the masculinity chain concept. So there's always this sense of how men and women and the whole civilization concept are treating each other. That's an ongoing theme that I get into every now and then. I take it quite literally and I work very hard, I research it. So it has not that much to do with color and not that much to do with expressionism, and more about the subject and the research that I do and reporting back what I find out. Is from my Deco-Fascist series, which I began right at the beginning of the 70s. And I started to see a transition between pot smokers and cocaine users and beer drinkers and alcohol. Suddenly there was sort of a hierarchy in the hip movement, and I thought I saw fascism kind of beginning. And I wanted to find out, where does fascism come from? What's the source? One of the things I found out that Art Deco and fascism kind of went hand in hand. Bauhaus, this whole idea of eliminating those things that are part of the problem. And Art Nouveau, which was very flowery and preceded Art Deco, was replaced by the simplistic and geometric forms of Art Deco. And the political leaders of the 30s sort of decided to follow that up a little bit and apply it to social problems. Curlicues and things that are kind of in the way, the 5%, just get rid of it. Get rid of that and just get down to the chord shape. And anyway, that was part of my investigation here. This is Mussolini. I also did Hitler, and you saw the Peron series. And what I came up with was the idea that Art Deco is to the ultra-right what social realism is to the ultra-left. Hi, we're still in the main room here, and one of the things you notice is I like the salon style of hanging. I put things up sort of helter-skelter, although there's some plan, but it's not in just repeated serial imagery. And here we're going to take a look at a couple pieces that are works on paper from the 80s. This is the Skagit Valley, another Skagit Valley scene. These are my works on paper, on black paper. I'm using oil pastel. I love oil pastel. It's a form of lipstick. You just get the crayon and you go right into the page. And you've got to really work hard, and you've got to be serious. You can't really smear or work two colors together. It's really sort of a direct and all at one time sort of painting and drawing. And I love that. But these were part of a great love affair I was having at the time. And there were several in this series. And I only have a couple left, and this is them. And one of them is actually brought back by one of my patrons. The piece is too large, and I do buy back older work. But these are Skagit Valley scenes, oil pastel on paper, mid-'80s on up to some of my last work on paper, early 90s. So in the mid-'80s, I began my printmaking adventure. not truly a printmaker, but I really like printmaking and particularly monoprinting. One of the ideas was to try linoleum block. And you know, the linoleum comes in 24 by 36 sheets, at least at Dan Smith. So I thought that's as big as you normally go. Only later did I find out that very few, if any, printmakers work that large with linoleum. This would maybe be cut up into 5 or 6 pieces. But, you know, being self-taught, I didn't know any better. The other thing was that normally you cut out around the line. When I did my drawing on the linoleum, I decided to cut the line out. What happens is you end up with a very black print if you're using black ink instead of a print with a lot of paper showing. One of my first prints was Il Bistro, which is over here. This is in the Pike Place Market, one of my favorite bars, one of my favorite restaurants. And this was the side of a tavern that I used to operate called the Victrola. After I did the Bistro, I did Chinatown, I did the Trattoria Michelli. There was First Thursday and the Pike Place Markets, First and Pike scene. Chinatown Thai Tongues was incredibly popular. And the Virginia Inn, which is over here to the right, which is one of my favorite pieces. That's at First and Virginia, of course. And the only real attempt to do a market piece, the rest of these are sort of the market by default, was this one here called Market Fresh Fish. And this piece is one of the few that I did that's actually a dedicated market piece, in that it's about the market, and I've combined 3 different fish markets into one here, which is Jack's Fish and Pure Food Fish and Pike Place Fish. There's all elements of all 3 of these. I was a fish market vendor for about a month. Really hard work, working with that ice, getting there early, staying there late, always in rubber boots. It's not a ton of fun. It might look glamorous, but really it's not that much fun. I'd much rather sell fruits and vegetables. Hey, we got them now, jet fresh papaya. Come on, who's next? I love doing that.
Just throwing?
No, just throwing the tomatoes. So over here we've got some more of the prints. This is my market print, First and Pike, and this is the newsstand and looking off into that crosswalk crowded with people. I love that corner in Seattle. And then here, other people. Notice that these are hand colored in gouache. I start out in black and white. I draw this on a plate. I carve it. I ink it up and proof it. And after I proof it, I print it on another plate, because it takes a positive to go to a negative and then a negative back to a positive, sort of a form of primitive photography. So I have to recut the second plate, cut that, ink that, and print it. And out of an addition of 50 pieces of paper, I get about 35 good prints. 15 will be for, say, the black and white numbered edition, another 15 for hand coloring, and 4 or 5 artist proofs. And this is an example of that. And the color I use is gouache. That's a sort of a watercolor base with a little bit of milk binder in it. And I paint that on with a brush. And that's the Trat. That one is also the Trattoria. And when I first did these, the Trattoria is a one-room restaurant. People talking to each other, people who didn't know each other. The whole idea of sharing and community was at one time very much exemplified by the one-room Trattoria Michelli. And I'll take you across the room here. I have to show one other print, which is the Place Pigall. Go ahead. Currently, this is the last print I've produced, and this is the 70s market, Place Pigall Tavern. And this is in the location where the Place Pigall restaurant is, right there behind the fish market, underneath the clock. And in the 70s, this was a hippie bar. It had a great jukebox, Edith Piaf, Otis Redding. It had a view of the waterfront, had a nice wooden bar in the front, and it was very, very popular. It had been for a long time a merchant marine bar, and Dottie and others who made it really a special, special place where you often did hear French music or international music. It had a great flair and a great name, the Place Pigall. And so when the new owners came in and wanted to commemorate the previous owner and give themselves something special, I suggested we actually go back and remember what it used to be like in the 70s. And this was printed in the 100-year anniversary year of 2007. Again, there's about 35 in the edition. And I really enjoy this print because I loved the market in the 70s. I used to be the mayor of the market at that time. We had a lot of fun, and the Pigall, with its wildness and craziness, exemplified a lot of what the market was about. So these are called Los Mexicanos, and these are monoprints. And the monoprint is a type of printmaking that I enjoy because it's the most painterly of printmaking. You put your ink or your paints on a plate and in the way that you want to do it, and then you put the paper on top, you run it through the press, you pull off the paper, all the ink goes onto the paper, nothing is left on the plate. So it's a one-of-a-kind shot. And I first did this, my first chance of doing this was in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and this is called Los Mexicanos. And I liked doing that in the brown tones because I thought that the brown was a better, true representation of the Mexicans rather than high color Polaroid. One of the things that the Mexicans do is they see themselves as an extension of Europe. And when you look in the old books, you see engravings, you see these early daguerreotypes. These are all done in singular brownish sepia tones, sometimes in black. They don't see themselves as the happy people in the Polaroid photographs of the tourists. They see themselves as this extension of a long European history. So I wanted to do that by, acknowledge that by doing this series of monoprints, Los Mexicanos, in the sepia tone. And I have continued with that series title, and it continues today. But that was the first series of monoprints done at the Casa de Cultura in San Miguel de Allende, 1988. So, welcome to my wall of small. The wall of small is a big explosion of small pieces from every era and every subject I've worked on. One of the things is I found out that rich people really like small pictures. You know, you go into their private hallways and parts of the houses sort of reserved for them, and you see not big giant paintings that they have in the living room, but the little small Mark Tobey or the little small Billy King, the things that sort of delicate and can be taken with them if they need to. So I like doing small pieces. Plus, small is fun, and when I travel, small is easy. Here, for example, I deconstructed the avocado. And over here, I'm reworking the whole idea of these Chapala boats, these highly painted tourist boats in the Mexican area of Lake Chapala. I'm doing beach scenes. I'm working with, just stay over my shoulder, Rich. I don't think the audience will get seasick trying to capture all these. But these are, you know, some gouaches, some Mexican, some scenes of Vallarta, the Spanish bar, the Cristos of Mexico, monoprints, more of the beach. My new idea where I'm working on the CD as the plate for printmaking. This is actually a IBM CD. Here's some of the Chapala boats done in high color. My Mexican Cristos. Here's some of my first work on found wood. This is a transom that's from over the doorway. I needed something to work on in Mexico, so I was working with what I could find, found wood. And I started also using water-based oils at that time. Then there's some prints, and I've got some of the Vortex series, little small detail studies. Here's something from Portugal, and the Skirts Up series, crack, my other people, my crack addicts. Here's an engraving. I did finally learn how to do a little bit of engraving, and that here's one called Lips. then again we have the scenes of the beach in Mexico over here, and then we've got other people, more of the Cristos, some early still life studies, and more etchings. More etchings over here. Okay.
Let's go. You're on. 1 second. Go ahead.
All right. So here we have some of the etchings. I am working with some etchings. And here's one of the Skirts Up series, which is kind of fun. This is a monoprint. The Skirts Up series has to do with the Birth of Eve series. And I can explain that at length if you ever come in. I'm also working here again with a CD, more of the Cristo. And here's a nice painting of Bar de Navidad in oil that I did paint in Bar.
Good.
So here are two more pieces from my work in San Miguel de Allende. This is called Is It Love? And here the couple meets with all the promise, and then here at the end they're standing in their living room sort of arguing with each other. And in between this is about 6 or 7 highly graphic sex scenes that I did in this Catholic town, sort of exorcising my deep frustration. Tough to get laid in a Catholic country, at least for me. And but there's something here that I really like. And one of the things I learned, this is the reductive school of printmaking. You put the ink on and then you take it off, and where you take it off, it shows back to the paper. And from this, I was able to learn how to do the old world style of painting, which I used in the Millennium Metaphor, the homoerotic males and those big sort of old world style figures really are generated from the knowledge that I learned in doing that same sort of work in printmaking. Now I'm going to show you basically the last of the works on paper, again except for a couple I did in Mexico. And that is the Summer Lake series. Summer Lakes, I used to motorcycle around all the time in the summer. I loved motorcycling and tenting out there. And this is a series of lakes. This is Lake Union, for example, Lake Union at night. I love swimming in that lake. I love summer in the Northwest. And I've gone everywhere from Coeur d'Alene down to Tillamook and the San Juan Islands, either by scooter or by motorcycle. But here's Lake Union, one of my favorite places. And this is at night looking back at the Fremont Bridge and with the various lights and colors of these speedboats leaving little trailers in the water. Here's Lake Chelan, which is one of the world's greatest lakes. Clean, beautiful, cold, and in a great setting. And it just doesn't get any better than Lake Chelan. Over here, this is Liberty Lake, which is on the Idaho-Washington border, just outside of Spokane. A smaller lake that heats up quickly in the summer, one of the first lakes that you can swim in over there. And everybody's got their watercraft out there all swimming and they're boating and they're being pulled behind and the hill is drying out and it's a time to have a beer and just have more fun. I love the Summer Lake series. It's abstract, but it's real. It comes from my own experience, and I really kind of enjoy it. So really the last of the last, as far as I can remember, of the works on paper include the Ponga series. And this is about 1994 in Puerto Vallarta. They had this big old beat-up boat that people would use, push very heavy and waterlogged out into the water, and then they would bob along and get onto their motorboats. And here it is, the Ponga at night on the beach, very empty, moonlight. Or here in the daytime, oppressively the light is beating down, all the colors come out, the shadow of the palm trees. And I used a little bit of palette knife and color. Again, I'm teaching myself as we go, I'm learning, but I enjoy the spontaneity and the energy of all these pieces. And in this series, there are probably 6, maybe 7 of these, and these are the 2 that I've kept for myself, and they are in this show. Now this piece is part of the Modern Still Life series. Modern Still Life series comes after the Mexican Bulls, and it's the work that I started doing to sort of catch up on things that I never did in college. I was a college dropout, remember? So I never really got around to the shading and the palette, the color theory, some of these things. I've had to learn them on my own. And this is studying shading and a different point of view. This is oil on wood. This is a hollow core door. And one of my favorite pieces, I think it has one of the most unique points of view. And I don't know anyone else who's actually painted a picture that looks like this one. Here I have a Mexican basket. This painting has everything that I have in my Mexican Bowl series consolidated into one piece, where the Mexican Bowls is a series of grids and related colors and shapes. This is all one color and one shape turned into one, shall we say, a vortex. And this piece I think has a lot of mood, I think it has a lot of character even, and it's colorful yet a little somber. It's more of a northwest color pattern. And the Mexican Bowls, Richard, stay with me, I'll show you this one. The Mexican Bowls here, a very popular series, maybe my most popular. This is a series of color studies, a palette study, trying to develop a palette that people would think of as being Billy King. And these are warm colors. These are colors of Mexico, of Latin America, and I hot them up. I use a pink colored gesso. And you can see, if you look over here, Richard, that in the corner I have one of my Mexican Bowl series. In that piece, you see the pink very commonly. The pink is the gesso. Unlike the Mexican Bowl, in the modern still life, I wanted to show the act of painting. I wanted to show the act of thinking through a painting, the very beginning, the chaos of the start sort of control. And so once the piece was in any form sort of balanced, I would stop the modern still life, because I wanted the public, the viewer, to see the painting right at the very creative beginning. And that pink, that's the gesso that's showing through. So one of the things that I do, or have done in the past, is I find wood and various objects in the loading docks and in the dumpsters down in downtown Seattle. And this is some kiosk that was found in some dumpster, and I decided to turn into this piece called My DNA. And if, Richard, you come around the back, you see that the human here in front is whoever it is completely different here on the back. And here we see the influences and the characters that actually create the person or the personality that the person is. But that's found wood.
Okay, Billy, what are you thinking?
All right. So this is another of the found wood pieces. This was a loading dock shipping crate, and I tried to get everybody, all the racial types, all the personality types, all the gender types. I try to do this huge population on this. You know, there's 4 different elements or sides to this. Actually, there's 5, because there's a top part too. And it's, well, I've got some shipping materials in there right now. One thing I learned doing the kiosk and doing this one, and we'll go around here and see the urban totems, there's a reason why artists work in rectangles or in common shapes. This is 5 times the effort of doing a flat painting. And I really didn't think, I thought it might be twice as much. It's 5 times as much. Every side demands just as much focus and attention as the other side. So you're really doing 5 paintings here, not just one. And that takes 5 times as much time. Okay, so this is my urban totems. These are inspired by the Native Americans who are downtown and the many faces I see down here, and the fact that I found this wood, once again, in a loading dock. This is something tossed in the dumpster. This, I believe, is some molding, some close-grained fur. And these are all the personality types that I see on a daily basis downtown. And I think there are, there's 5 here. I think there are about a dozen of these in the origin. I really like the look. I like the fact that these can be hung flat, or that these can be leaned, or that they can be spread out and moved around. There's a sculptural painting option here with these pieces, but these are known as the urban totems. The tallest is about 10 feet tall, and the shortest is, about 8 foot tall. Complicated, complicated to work that tall and that thin. If you lay them flat, you can't see everything. If you stand them up, you got to get a chair and get up there. Again, there's a reason why you work with the rectangle or the square or the circle in close proximity. These are tough to do. So Richard, get in here and take some images of this grouping. This is some of my most recent work. And they are the When Vortex Collide series. Oil on hollow core door. Begin in the summer of 2008, and I'm still working on them. They're an ongoing series, and like the urban totems, the pieces we just looked at, these can be moved around, they can be shifted, they can be put flat against the wall, turned around, separated, or brought together. They're designed to be part sculpture, part painting, and maybe for the modern environment where there's a casualness about furniture and electronics, maybe the idea of having art that just leans is more valid than actually finding a piece of art that you've got to sort of cement into the wall. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is sort of deconstruct that whole idea of the necessity for framing or controlling how a piece looks, letting it just be where it is the intention of this group.